Hello and welcome to another video in the series Archaeology and Islam. My name is Dan Gibson, and today we want to examine a question that viewers have asked about pre-Islamic gods. Their question is, if Petra is the original Mecca, then why is Dushara the main god worshipped in Petra? Why is he not mentioned in the Quran? And why does the Quran mention Hubal, who was the main god worshipped in Mecca? Why is he not found in Petra? This will be the first of several videos that will deal with pre-Islamic idols. So let's first start with the god Hubal. In future videos, I will try to deal with other gods such as Al-Uzza, Al-Qutbi, and Al-Lat, and so forth. So we have lots of ground we can cover. But in this particular video, I want to deal with Hubal. He was the god of the Quraysh tribe, the highest god for them in pre-Islamic times. This idol was so important that Muhammad's grandfather, his name was Abdul Muttalib, he took young Muhammad down to Hubal, down to the temple, and had him dedicated to the god Hubal. Both Ibn Hisham and Al-Tabri tell this, so it comes from trusted sources. Ibn Hisham tells us that Abdul Muttalib was cleaning out a beer or an old well or cistern near the Kaaba in the sacred area. That beer or that cistern was known as Zamzam. Well, cleaning it out, he found some ancient armor and some gold. The Quraysh tribe claimed that they had a right to share in the find. Abdul Muttalib denied it, but he was willing to submit the matter to a sacred lot. He said that he would make 2 arrows for the Kaaba, 2 arrows for the Quraysh people, and 2 arrows for himself. The 2 arrows which came out of the quiver would determine to whom the property belonged. This was agreed on by everyone, and so he made these different arrows for the Kaaba and for himself and for the Quraysh. And then they were given to the priest in charge of the divine arrows, which were thrown beside the idol for Hubal, which was an image in the Kaaba area. Indeed, the greatest of their images, it says. Then he drew the arrows from the quiver to determine who would get parts of the treasure. There's another story where Abdul Muttalib encountered the opposition of the Quraysh when he was digging out Zamzam. He vowed that if he would have 10 sons, and if they would grow up and protect him, then he would sacrifice one of them at the Kaaba. Afterwards, when he had 10 sons, he told them about his vow. They agreed to obey him, and they asked what should they do. He said that each of them should get an arrow, write his name on it, and bring it to him. They did this, and he took them before the idol of Hubal, and he took them to the idol Hubal beside the Kaaba. You will have to read from Ibn Hisham 33 to get the end of the story. But for now we know that Hubal was an idol in the sacred area near the Kaaba. Hisham ibn al-Kalbi tells us in his book of idols that 7 arrows were placed before the image, which were cast for divination, for more difficult cases, such as determining if somebody had killed somebody, or virginity, or marriage, or these kinds of questions. These stories are from Islamic history. But what do the archaeologists and the historians tell us? Over the years, there's been a lot of speculation about Hubal. Historians and archaeologists have suggested many things. Some have suggested Hubal was the brother of Elat. Some have suggested that Hubal was a lunar deity. Some have suggested that the South Arabian mythology was based on a trinity of moon father and sun mother, and the evening star Venus, which would have been Hubal, was the sun, and so forth. The problem is that some of these historians like to spout ideas without any evidence behind them. You see, there's not a single scrap of concrete evidence that ties Hubal with southern Arabia, or even to the area around Mecca. There are only sources of information from a couple of places that I'm aware of. The first is early Islamic literature. The second is from ancient inscriptions and graffiti. Now, Let's have a look at some of these. But before we get to the inscriptions, let's consider this. In 1994, a man named Robert Murray authored a book, and he called it The Moon God Allah in the Archeology of the Middle East. In this book, Robert Murray tried to identify Hubal as a moon god and claimed that worshipping Allah evolved from Hubal and thus made Allah a moon god as well. The very next year, in 1995, a man named Stephen Van Natten began promoting these ideas through a website known as Balaam's Ass. The view was picked up by various anti-Muslim publications in the United States, and it started to grow. The next year, in 1996, Janet Parshall, hostess of a talk show, In the Market with Janet Parshall, she asserted that Muslims worship a moon god. From there, the concept of Hubal and Allah being a moon god spread, mostly by word of mouth or through uninformed people. These views of Hubal have been studied by Muslims and by Western scholars who've always insisted that there's no real evidence to link Hubal and Allah together, nor to connect them with being a moon god. So where did Hubal come from? Islamic sources tell us where he came from, this statue of Hubal. Al-Azraqi informs us that Amr ibn Kuhay brought the statue of Hubal from Hit in Mesopotamia, and he set it up beside the Kaaba. It was visited by people during pre-Islamic pilgrimage, and they would shave their hair in Hubal's presence. He says the statue was made of quartz with a golden hand. The golden hand is explained to us by Ibn al-Kalbi in the Book of Idols, where he tells us that very same statue, it came from Al-Belka in Balad Sham, so from Damascus, and it had one raised right hand when it was broken off. And so the Arabs repaired the right hand with a golden hand. This is an important point, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Just have your picture of Hubal, this god with his hand raised, and repaired with a golden hand up there. Now, some people have thought that Hubal was just a made-up name, and that there never was a Hubal. But that changed when archaeologists found the name Hubal written in stone and in inscriptions and in graffiti. Throughout modern Arabia, there are many bits and pieces of graffiti scratched on rocks and canyon walls. I found them all over, and lots of people have found them. Among the Thamudi graffiti can be found Bin Hubal as a name, or the son of Hubal. So the name does exist. Hubal's name appears later, about 25 BC, before the turn of the century, in Nabatean inscriptions from the city of Puzzoli in Italy. This city was a port city for Rome and a place where Arab Nabatean merchants gathered. It appears that there was a Nabatean temple there, and mention of the name Hubal and the son of Hubal are found in the Nabatean temple in Italy. The most important place where Hubal is mentioned is on a tomb inscription, and this is in the Nabatean city of Mada'in Salah. This city is somewhat like Petra. There are 138 Nabatean tombs there. Indeed, next to Petra, Mada'in Salah is the second largest of the Nabatean burial cities. Hubal is mentioned in different ways, but if we go to tomb number 39, now this is a picture of that tomb, and there's an inscription written at the top, and the inscription tells us that in year 9 of the king, that curses would come on whoever buys or sells the tomb or removes anyone or anything from the tomb. And then it says, whoever does not act according to what is written above will be liable to Dushara, Hubal, and Manat in the sum of 1,000 coins to be paid to the priest, unless they produce a letter from the family. Now, this is most interesting. It's a fascinating inscription because it pairs Dushara and Hubal together and then mentions a second god, Manat. Now let's think about this for a minute. Two gods are clearly mentioned here. The second was Manat, which we will look at in a future video. But the main deity, the name here is Dushara Hublu, or Hubal. You see, in the Nabatean script, the preposition li implies that it means and. And here in the inscription, li is used for Dushara, it's used for Manat, but it is missing in the name Hubal. In effect, the two names are joined together. Hubal and Dushara are paired together, making it Dushara Hublu. You don't see it in the English translation, but you see it clearly in the Nabatean script. The pairing of these two gods together open up a great window of understanding. But you say, how can two gods be joined together? Well, let's consider for a minute, because the answer is quite simple. The name Dushara is actually made up of two words, Du and Shara. Du means one, the one of the Shara mountains. Dushara. Now, the Shara mountains are the mountains that run down through Petra and down into Arabia, and the name originates, though, in the Petra region in Petra, and this is the God who is the one, and from the word one we understand the Lord, the one or the Lord of the Shara mountains. No name is given for this deity. Archaeologists and historians, they've long wondered, who is this God? What was his name, this one of the Shara mountains? The Lord of the mountains. And here we find an inscription that mentions the Lord of the mountains, Hubal. If this is truly right, then everywhere where it says Dushara, it also means Hubal. That is what this inscription is telling us. Now, remember, we have very little written history of the Nabateans. What we do have are thousands of graffiti written in the desert, short sentences here and there that archaeologists have to piece together. And we have the odd archaeological discovery of an inscription that's actually written on a building or on a rock that's a formal inscription. These we have to look at, monumental, Nabatean, and so forth. But when we look at this is a monumental inscription on a tomb, and it puts together Hubal and Dushara. Now remember, when I read Hubal was the chief god of the Quraysh, and there was a temple there beside the Kaaba, and an idol set up beside the Kaaba in the sacred area. If I go to Petra, this is exactly what I find. Beside the Kaaba is a temple dedicated to Dushara. Now we know that the Islamic records call him Hubal, but in Petra the records call him Dushara, Lord of the mountains. And the tomb in Madat and Selah tells us that Hubal was the Lord of the mountains. So we can bring these things together, and now we can identify in Petra this temple. Here in the early holy city of Islam, we can identify the temple. And it's only a stone's throw away from the original Kaaba. We've talked about that in previous videos. So with this in mind, let's explore a bit farther and try to understand, who is Hubal? What kind of god was he? Can he be found in other places? In all of the stories we'd read so far, it's clear that the origin of Hubal, the statue, came from up north, up in Syria. Philip Hitti, who believes the name Hubal came from an Armenian root. And so he says Hubal was made up of two words. The prefix is hu, the Aramaic term for spirit or God, and the prefix is Baal, hu Baal. It's also true in the Moabite language. And so Hubal, or Baal, he of Baal, or the god of Baal. This association with Baal opens up many possibilities. Interestingly enough, there are some surviving statues or engravings of Baal, and he's portrayed as a man holding something up in his right hand. An inscription found in Ugarit shows him holding something. In his left hand, he's got a stick, maybe leaves or flowers or club, and in his right hand, he's holding a large stick with something on the end. We're not sure what it is. Some people have said maybe it's a lightning rod. Other people said maybe he's got a weapon or something. We're not sure what's in his hands. Maybe there's some kind of sticks for throwing for divination. We don't know. But Baal is portrayed as someone with his hand up. Now, there's also a small statue of Baal that has survived. This statue shows us Baal with his right hand raised, but holds nothing in it. Whatever was in it is gone over the centuries. But it's easy to see why a statue might survive with the right hand broken off. And apparently the Arabs who got this idol fixed up the broken hand of Hubal, or Hubal, and they used gold, and they put his right hand up, and this idol stood near the original Kaaba, and the people used it for divination. But, as we said, the only major temple standing near the Kaaba was Dushara, the Lord of the Mountains. But we see these two come together, and so we see that Hubal and Dushara and Baal come together and are recognized as being names for much of the same deity. Now, Palmyra is an ancient city that was associated with the Nabatean merchants. In that city, there is a temple dedicated to Baal Shaman. We can tell that by an inscription on the building that clearly tells us it's dedicated to Baal Shaman. This limestone relief is dated to January 121 AD, and it is currently in the Museum of Fine Arts in Lyon, but thankfully it was saved from the recent destruction of ancient temples and sites in Syria. But there are many similarities between Dushara and Shaman. Both are male deities, both are supreme gods, both are rulers in the heaven. In fact, Dr. John Healy, the world expert on the religion of the Nabateans, considers Dushara, Baal Shaman, Gos, and so forth to be the same deities, but worshipped under different names. Hubal and Baal Shaman appear to be much the same god as well, just different names used by different people in different places and appear in just different times in history. Even the god Hadad appears to be much like the other gods that are there. Even their temples look much the same. For example, here is Dushara's temple in Petra, known as Qasr el-Bint. Not far away, we can go look at Datras, and we see that it looks much the same. And the temple over in Tanur looks much the same. And up in Syria, we have a temple there for Baal Shaman, but we also have Dushara there. So even there, they're associated together. And in Petra, there's an inscription that tells us that Baal Shaman is the god of the kings of the Nabateans. Mentions many of the kings and their families by name. Baal Shaman? We thought Dushara was the king. But you see, how can Baal Shaman be the lord of the kings? Because the main temple in Petra is for Dushara. But if we go to the Turkmenia tomb, we see it. It says there, that tells us that the god of the king is Dushara. It says it very plainly. So once again, Baal Shaman and Dushara are both attested to in the same city as being the principal deities. This is confirmed from a text from Ain el-Shalal, where both Baal Shaman and Dushara are described as lords of the king. So here we have two names for the same god. So what have we learned? The god Baal Shaman is mostly found in inscriptions in Syria and in the north. However, we are told that sometime in the past an Arab brought down this idol, Hubal, from Syria down to the holy city, and it became a snare to the Quraysh, so much so that it was located right beside the Kaaba. Muhammad's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, used this idol when he needed to know things. Arrows were thrown for divination. We know that Abdul Muttalib dedicated the Prophet Muhammad as a young boy to this idol. And when we go to Petra, we discover there is indeed a temple right beside the Kaaba. It is a temple to Dushara, the Lord of the Mountain. That name is lost to us, but we know from Madat and Salaf that this is the god Hubal. And Hubal, because of Baal Shaman and Dushara, these all are coming around meaning the same thing, the Lord of the Mountains. And it appears the Shara Mountains and the god of the Shara Mountains all the way through. So, if we link Hubal and the ancient worship of Baal in the north together, we find interesting things. Now, Christianity had triumphed over the Roman Empire. It overcame it by peace rather than by war, and so in Rome the worship of idols had come to an end. But in Arabia the old god still survived, and the Quraysh were caught up in idol worship until Muhammad and others came preaching that there's only one God. In closing, let me make one brief observation. about how many historians have approached idol worship. Because we have so little evidence, we are restricted to the graffiti and a few inscriptions on temples or graves. It has become common practice for those looking back in history, right from Ibn al-Kalbi in the Book of Idols, all the way down to today. People have identified dozens of gods, maybe even hundreds of gods. And so they will point out that in C there seems to be a temple to Baal Shaman, or right beside it a temple to Dushara. They could not be the same gods because they have different temples. Instead, they argue every temple has a different god. When they come to Petra, they have a problem identifying three churches that are side by side. They call them the blue church and the red church and so on. They don't suggest that Christians worship multiple gods. They're happy to accept that they had different views and different practice and different teaching and different ways of worship that have created different kinds of churches. I think the same thing can be said for the pagan world. Even though we find several temples in the same area, each dedicated to a god with a different sounding name, this does not mean that the people at the time saw them as being totally different gods. A Roman may call him Zeus, while a Nabatean may call him Dushara. Many of the god names are descriptive. Now imagine someone telling you that Christians worship different gods. That in one church they worshipped a god called love. In another church they may worship a god called grace. And in another church they worship the god of baptism. Different names on a building, they don't necessarily mean different gods. I think the same thing applies to pagans. Obviously, there are several different deities, but we still do not understand the pagan religions of pre-Islamic Arabia well enough to go around making big, bold statements. But I do believe we can identify Hubal and Hubal's temple, and it's right where it should be, right beside the Kaaba in Petra. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another video in the series Archaeology and Islam.